Listen up, recruits. Today we're going to talk about one of the most effective tools in your arsenal when it comes to setting up defenses and ambushes. That tool is the M1801 Claymore mine. Now, I don't want anyone messing around with this unless you know exactly what you're doing. This isn't a toy. This thing is designed to deliver some serious damage, and if you're not careful, it'll take you out just as fast as it'll take out the enemy.
How does the claymore actually work?
Good question, son. The claymore is an anti-personnel mine, and it's designed to be directional, meaning it blows up in the direction you point it. When you set this bad boy up, you're aiming to send out a fan-shaped spray of steel balls at the enemy. Imagine a shotgun blast on steroids, only instead of buckshot. You've got about 700 steel balls coming out at around 4,000 feet per second. That'll tear through anything in its path, people, light vehicles, you name it.
So how do you set it up properly?
First thing you need to know is how to position it. On the front of the claymore, you'll see it says front toward enemy, and I don't care how much of a hurry you're in, you always make sure that side is facing where you want the blast to go. If you set this thing up wrong, you could be the one catching that blast, and that's not something you want happening. You plant it on the ground, or secure it to a tree, or some other solid surface, using the legs or the provided stakes. Make sure it's stable because you don't want it moving around after you set it.
What's the effective range of the claymore?
The kill zone of the claymore is about 50 meters in a 60-degree arc from the front of the mine. But don't think for a second that's all you have to worry about. The steel balls can be dangerous up to 250 meters away, depending on the terrain and how the mine is set up. You set this thing up in a clear area, and anything within that 50-meter range is going to be shredded. Beyond that, those steel balls are still traveling fast enough to do some serious damage, so you need to be mindful of your surroundings and make sure you're not putting friendly forces in the line of fire.
How do you detonate it?
That's where the M57 firing device comes in. This is what you use to set off the claymore. The device is connected to the mine with a detonating cord called an M4 electric blasting cap. You've got a safety pin on the M57 to prevent accidental detonation. You remove that pin, squeeze the handle, and that sends an electrical charge through the wire to the blasting cap, setting off the C4 inside the claymore. When that C4 explodes, it propels all those steel balls forward in a deadly arc. Now, remember, this is not something you set off by accident. You always double-check your connections, and you always make sure you know what's in front of that mine before you squeeze that handle.
What if we need to set up a claymore for an ambush?
That's one of the most effective ways to use a claymore, son. You can set up multiple claymores in a line or in a defensive perimeter. You control when they go off, so you wait until the enemy is in the perfect position before you pull the trigger. If you're laying an ambush, you want to place the mines where they'll have the maximum impact. Think about where the enemy is likely to be and set the mines to cover those areas. You also want to make sure you've got good cover and a clear escape route. When those mines go off, all hell's going to break loose, and you don't want to be stuck in the middle of it.
Can the claymore be used in conjunction with other mines or traps?
Absolutely. The claymore is versatile, and it can be used as part of a larger defensive plan. You might set up tripwires connected to additional mines or use the claymore to funnel the enemy into another kill zone where you've got more traps waiting. The key is to think strategically. Don't just set it and forget it. You need to think about how the enemy is going to move and how you can use the terrain and your resources to maximize the damage. Set up multiple claymores to cover different angles and always have a backup plan in case the enemy tries to outflank you.
Is there any way the enemy can disable or avoid the claymore?
The enemy's going to try, but that's why you need to be smart about how you set these things up. If you just plop one down in the open, sure, they might spot it and find a way around it or even disable it. But if you set it up in a concealed position where they can't see it until it's too late, that's a different story. Use natural cover to hide the claymore, or set it up in a place where the enemy isn't likely to be looking. You can also booby trap the firing device or the wires to make it harder for them to mess with it.
How do we ensure we're safe from our own claymores?
That's one of the most important things to remember. Always know where your claymores are placed, and make sure everyone else on your team knows too. Mark the positions if you can and communicate with your squad. You never want to be in a situation where someone on your side accidentally walks in front of one. When you're setting them up, make sure they're placed in a way that directs the blast away from friendly positions. And if you're moving around in the area after they're set, be cautious. The last thing you want is a blue-on-blue incident.
Can claymores be recovered and reused?
Yes, but you've got to be damn careful. If the mine hasn't been detonated, you can recover it, but you need to disarm it first. Remove the blasting cap carefully, making sure you don't accidentally set it off. Once the blasting cap is removed, the claymore is safe to move. But always remember, once it's been deployed, it's not as reliable. The components can be damaged or degraded, so if you do recover it, you need to inspect it thoroughly before considering reuse. In most cases, it's better to use a fresh one to ensure maximum reliability.
Are there any environmental factors that affect the effectiveness of the claymore?
Yes, there are. Terrain, weather, and even vegetation can impact how effective a claymore will be. In open, flat terrain, the blast will spread out more evenly, covering the full 60-degree arc. But if you're in a jungle or forest, trees and thick vegetation can block or deflect the steel balls, reducing the effectiveness. Rain or snow can also affect how the mine performs. Wet conditions can make the ground softer, which might cause the stakes to sink or the mine to shift. Cold weather can affect the components too, particularly the detonating cord and blasting cap. Always consider the environment when setting up a claymore and adjust your tactics accordingly.
What happens if the claymore doesn't detonate when we trigger it?
If the claymore doesn't go off, you've got a potential dud, and that's a dangerous situation. Don't rush in to check it out. Stay behind cover and wait for a while to ensure it's not a delayed detonation. After you're sure it's safe, approach the mine carefully. Check the connections on the blasting cap and the firing device. If you can safely remove the blasting cap and reattach it, you might be able to try again. But if you're unsure or it's still not working, it's better to mark the location and report it. Leave the disarming to the experts.
Can the claymore be set off remotely, or does it always require the manual firing device?
The standard setup uses the M57 firing device, but there are ways to set up a claymore for remote detonation. You can connect it to a remote control system, use a tripwire, or even rig it with a time delay if needed. But these setups require a higher level of skill and should only be done by someone who knows exactly what they're doing. The key is to maintain control over the detonation so that it goes off when you want it to, and not a moment sooner. Misuse of these methods can be as dangerous as the enemy, so if you're not trained in these techniques, stick with a manual firing device.
How do you know when and where to use a claymore in the field?
It all comes down to strategy. The claymore is most effective when you know the enemy's movement patterns and can predict where they'll be. Use it to protect key points like choke points, trails, or entryways. But remember, this isn't something you just throw down without thinking. You've got to plan it out, think about where the enemy is coming from, and how you can catch them where it hurts the most. And always consider your escape route. Once you've set those claymores, you need to be able to get out of there fast if things go south. In the end, the claymore is just another tool in your toolbox. It's up to you to use it wisely and effectively to protect your team and accomplish the mission. Now get out there and show me you know how to use this thing right.